At 06:47 a.m. on a mist-heavy morning in May 2022, a team of Bavarian hydrologists drilled into an anomaly beneath Garmisch-Partenkirchen's southern ridge, expecting to find a sealed aquifer. Instead, their bore camera revealed corroded metal, faded insignias, and the unmistakable curvature of a reinforced blast door. The coordinates 474921N, 110957E would later appear on a Bundesarchiv report marked vertraulich, for internal review only. Within days, the quiet Alpine town became the site of an unpublicized federal excavation. Behind the door, 50 meters below ground, investigators entered a forgotten complex wired with obsolete ventilation systems and rusted machinery marked Project Morgenlicht. The air was sterile, the silence absolute, until the first film canisters were lifted from the debris, their labels stamped with the insignia of the Reichsforschungsrat and a date, February 1945. Chapter 1. The Bunker Beneath Garmisch-Partenkirchen. The first official report on the discovery arrived at the Bundesamt für Strahlenschutz in Munich 3 days after the drill breach. The document, filed under the identifier BFS 2022 GRP14, described anomalous metallic infrastructure consistent with mid-20th century military construction, bearing intact ventilation shafts, electrical conduits, and sealed access panels. The team leader, Dr. Lucas Hettner, noted in his handwritten log that the chamber's internal temperature had remained a constant 11 degrees Celsius, despite external variation. What drew immediate attention, however, were the traces of cesium-134 detected near the central generator assembly, a clear sign that whatever had operated here was not merely a communications relay. As early speculation suggested, 2 days later, the site was quietly transferred under jurisdiction of the Bundesnachrichtendienst BND. Local authorities were ordered to restrict media access under the pretext of groundwater contamination. By June, the bunker had been officially reclassified as Subsurface Military Waste Site 71A. Publicly, it ceased to exist. Privately, however, Federal Archivist Anja Kruger was assigned to cross-reference any wartime engineering blueprints that might match the discovered layout. Her search led her deep into a partially digitized file set labeled Reichsforschungsrat, Aeronomieabteilung, declassified only in fragments since the late 1990s. Among the surviving entries, one project name stood out, Project Morgenlicht. Morning Light. According to the limited correspondence between 1944 and early 1945, Morning Light was under the supervision of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, head of Germany's secret weapons program, and physicist Karl Diebner, a controversial figure expelled from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for his unorthodox experimentation with ionized plasma. Their objective, as phrased in one surviving memorandum, was the energetic destabilization of tropospheric strata for strategic meteorological disruption. It read like science fiction, but Diebner's technical notes, recovered later from American archives under Operation Paperclip, confirmed his obsession with harnessing atmospheric ions to produce localized pressure gradients. In plain terms, they were attempting to weaponize weather. Inside the bunker, excavation crews began cataloging artifacts under the supervision of Bundeswehr engineer Captain Markus Engel. The first chamber, designated Sector A1, contained 5 aluminum cylinders wrapped in degraded rubber sheaths, each linked by copper tubing to an array of ceramic capacitors. The equipment bore the insignia of the Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Agency, and serial numbers corresponding to late 1944 manufacturing in Stuttgart. Yet none of the technical manuals located nearby made mention of their purpose. Engel's team found one partially legible notebook with ink faded nearly to transparency. The last dated entry, 12th of February 1945, read, "Field test postponed. Discharge unstable. Awaiting Kammler's arrival." By mid-July, word of the discovery had spread within academic circles despite official silence. Independent historian Dr. Erich Neumann, who specialized in classified wartime technology, published an online abstract suggesting the Garmisch bunker could have been one of the Sonderbauwerke, special structures built during the final months of the Reich for experimental weapons testing. The article vanished within 48 hours, replaced by a notice citing inaccurate sourcing. Neumann himself declined interviews thereafter, later claiming that representatives from the Defense Ministry advised him to suspend his inquiries. Meanwhile, The recovered film reels were transferred to the Federal Film Archive in Berlin for digital preservation. The footage, captured on 16mm Agfa stock, showed grainy black and white imagery of a laboratory filled with heavy conduits, glass discharge tubes, and rotating vanes resembling early ion engines. Technicians in SS uniforms monitored gauges while an oscillograph displayed irregular spikes of current. A title card identified the footage as Versuch 17, atmosphärische Ionisierung, Standort, Garmisch. The reel ended abruptly after a flash of overexposure, followed by several seconds of distorted static. Audio engineers later determined that the distortion matched the frequency interference of high-voltage corona discharge, evidence that whatever they were experimenting with involved immense electrical output. In September, Kruger located a cross-reference between Project Morgenlicht and another file classified by Allied intelligence in 1946. T312, 1945-41, Weather Operations, German Southwest Command. This file, retrieved from the US National Archives, included a translation of captured German field orders describing an atmospheric manipulation experiment intended to create low-pressure fronts over Allied bomber routes. Although American analysts dismissed it as pseudoscience, they nonetheless retained the documents under the broader category of unexplained technologies. For decades, historians assumed it was propaganda. Now, the rediscovered bunker suggested otherwise. As winter approached, the BND restricted further civilian access, citing the need for electrical hazard containment. The hydrologists were dismissed from the site, replaced by Bundeswehr personnel and 2 representatives from the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Physics. A portable Faraday cage was erected around the generator room. Engel's last internal memo, leaked months later, described measurable static differentials and intermittent blue corona discharge along the remaining copper lattice despite full disconnection from power. He concluded that the residual charge appeared self-sustaining, a claim that drew immediate skepticism but was corroborated by video footage. By January 2023, the entire site was resealed under concrete. Officially, operations were concluded, but satellite imagery from early February revealed continued activity. Thermal anomalies indicating subterranean power sources still active beneath the ridge. The discovery prompted parliamentary inquiry, BT Drucksache 20-4172, questioning whether the Ministry of Defense was conducting atmospheric or electromagnetic research at unregistered facilities. The ministry denied all claims. Months later, a whistleblower using the pseudonym K12 sent encrypted files to investigative journalist Hannah Voss. The files contained scanned blueprints marked Kraftfeld generator, Typ Morgenlicht, and a letter addressed to Kammler dated March 1945. The letter's final line read, "Prototype sustained atmospheric discharge for 12 minutes before critical failure. Orders received to dismantle and conceal, awaiting extraction to Bavaria." That letter, if authentic, indicated that Project Morgenlicht had reached operational testing days before the collapse of the Third Reich, and that Garmisch-Partenkirchen had been its burial ground. When Voss attempted to verify the documents, she was informed that all federal requests concerning Morgenlicht fell under the jurisdiction of the Sicherheitsüberprüfungsgesetz, Germany's security clearance law, effectively sealing them for national security reasons. Within weeks, her publication retracted its investigative series after what editors called legal consultation. The files disappeared from the internet, though mirror copies continued to circulate on encrypted channels. Today, the coordinates remain cordoned off. Locals recall military trucks entering the forest at night and low-frequency hums echoing from the valley. The official stance remains silence, but fragments of declassified correspondence now paint a chilling image. A wartime project that sought to control the weather through atmospheric ionization, buried beneath the Alps, rediscovered by accident. And if the readings recorded in 2022 are accurate, the experiment might never have truly stopped. Beneath the Bavarian soil, remnants of Morgenlicht still hum faintly, an echo of an invention history refused to acknowledge, but one that the mountain refuses to forget. Chapter 2, Operation Cold Veil, The Polar Files. In February 2021, a declassified memo surfaced on Norway's National Security Archive portal under release code. NSM 1957 CE12 it referenced an Anglo-American reconnaissance mission known as Operation Cold Veil, conducted under joint authorization from the US Air Force Arctic Division and British SIS in the spring of 1957. The brief described an unauthorized Soviet platform beneath the polar ice cap, presumed experimental, and noted recovery of materials inconsistent with known Soviet metallurgy. Most readers dismissed it as bureaucratic relic, until an independent researcher from Oslo University, Ingrid Lunde, traced the coordinates in the appendix to a small region of the Arctic Basin near 82.47 Degan, 42.15 Degai, precisely where recent satellite imagery showed a metallic anomaly trapped within the ice shelf. Lunde's team of marine geologists, equipped with a magnetometer drone, confirmed the presence of a submerged structure at a depth of 43 meters. The shape was unnatural, an array of 6 symmetrical modules radiating from a central core. When they published preliminary scans, their data was pulled offline within hours. A week later, they received a notice from the Norwegian Ministry of Defense citing national security relevance under NATO confidentiality provisions. But it was too late. Copies of the imagery had already circulated through private scientific forums, prompting renewed interest in Operation Cold Veil and its origins. What had the mission uncovered, and why had it been buried for over 6 decades? Archival digging revealed that Operation Cold Veil was launched from Thule Air Base, Greenland, on 9 March 1957. Aircraft logs from the 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing recorded an unscheduled C-124 Globemaster flight with cargo code MXR Delta 14. The manifest listed 21 crates. Destination unrecorded, pilot signature illegible. The flight disappeared from the official register soon after landing. Declassified British intelligence summaries from the same period noted a joint assessment conducted in Tromsø involving recovered Soviet research apparatus before all documentation was sealed by the Foreign Office under code PF 931. For decades, the event remained unverified, a Cold War rumor filed under conspiracy. In April 2022, the US Defense Intelligence Agency released 146 pages of redacted reports under the Freedom of Information Act, labeled DIA 57119A, Cold Veil Technical Debriefing. The documents referenced the recovery of a metallic structure of Soviet origin incorporating unknown thermoelectric modules exhibiting continuous power generation under sub-zero conditions. Engineers noted the absence of any fuel source and described residual radiation signatures consistent with isotopic decay products of strontium-90. The discovery predated the public debut of Soviet RTG radioisotope thermoelectric generator technology by nearly a decade. According to handwritten annotations, sample units retained for independent analysis, location undisclosed. The report concluded with a chilling remark: origin theory, energy research platform, or early-stage atmospheric surveillance node. Recommend indefinite containment. The existence of such a platform suggested that in 1957, both superpowers were experimenting with perpetual Arctic installations, nuclear-powered outposts designed to monitor or manipulate environmental data undetectably. Yet no Soviet record of such technology has ever surfaced. When Norwegian journalist Espen Dahl contacted Russia's Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in 2023, officials claimed that no data corresponding to an Arctic project matching that description existed. But independent historian Olga Mikhailova uncovered a single line in a 1958 Soviet naval logistics memo: loss of platform object Z-14 during polar transfer. No retrieval authorized. Object Z-14. The match was too precise to ignore. As Lunde's research continued under restricted supervision, her team detected residual heat emanations through the ice. These pulses occurred at predictable intervals, precisely every 3.8 hours, too rhythmic to be natural geothermal activity. Using ground-penetrating radar, they captured what appeared to be the remnants of reactor shielding and a central control chamber filled with still functional mechanical assemblies. Despite the ice entombment, faint electrical differentials persisted. The phenomenon echoed reports from the DIA's 1957 data logs, which noted continuous output despite disconnection. What power source could endure under polar ice for 60 years without decay? To find out, Lunde collaborated with a retired NATO electrical engineer, Captain Hugh Renard, who had served at Thule during the late 1950s. Renard recalled classified operations involving crates of Soviet gear, flown in under darkness, guarded by men wearing unmarked parkas with no visible insignia. He remembered that one of the devices emitted a low hum even while disconnected. "We were told not to go near it," he said. "They said it was part of a radiation experiment, but it wasn't. It ran too clean." His recollection matched the Cold Veil files precisely. Power without decay, function without maintenance. The breakthrough came when Norwegian divers extracted a small, cylindrical core from the ice using a heated drill assembly in early 2023. The object, measuring 30 centimeters in length, was composed of layered alloys and ceramic composites unknown to contemporary metallurgy. It emitted a weak electromagnetic field, self-sustaining and constant. When analyzed, isotopic ratios revealed traces of plutonium-238 and unidentified microstructural materials resembling beryllium oxide lattices, designs that did not exist in known Soviet or Western reactor models of the time. The energy output was minute yet unending. Scientists could only speculate whether this was a prototype isotope generator or something more advanced. Within days, Norwegian authorities confiscated the core under orders from NATO's Allied Command Transformation Branch, labeling it strategic material. Lunde's laboratory was sealed. An anonymous leak soon reached investigative reporter Magnus Ruud, who received scans of internal NATO correspondence labeled Cold Veil Follow-up, January 2023, that letters confirmed that the recovered device demonstrates properties inconsistent with known thermoelectric decay, constants, and suggested the presence of persistent electromechanical equilibrium, a phrase with no clear scientific meaning. More telling was a paragraph referencing further examination by retained specialists. From the original retrieval operation, this indicated that at least some personnel from the 1957 mission was still alive and still under contract, Ruud tracked one. Former RAF technician Alan Kershaw, now living under government pension protection in Kent. In a recorded interview, Kershaw described the 1957 mission in terse fragments. "We thought it was another Soviet weather station, but when we got there, it was like nothing we'd seen. Smooth alloy surfaces, seamless joints, no rivets, no welds. The place was still warm, even though it was buried under meters of ice. When we cut our way in, the Geiger counters went mad. The Americans took everything, machines, documents, even the ice samples. They told us to forget it." Kershaw passed away 2 months later, his death unreported in public registers. Declassified US documents released quietly in 2024 add another dimension. Cold Veil may not have been a recovery mission at all, but a cover-up. One memo addressed to the Air Research and Development Command, signed by Colonel Matthew R. Langston, states, "Operation Cold Veil successfully contained the anomalous Soviet construct. Recommend continued burial to prevent potential replication." The term containment implies that what was found posed more than strategic curiosity, it was a hazard. Another attachment mentions unexpected emission persistence threatening local communications equipment, suggesting the recovered core emitted disruptive electromagnetic interference. Today, the anomaly remains under ice, officially categorized as a debris field. The coordinates are omitted from modern maps, but researchers who have viewed the classified radar imagery confirm that faint energy pulses still radiate through the ice shelf, detectable only during certain magnetic conditions. The pulse has not weakened since its rediscovery. In 2025, the Norwegian government quietly extended a permanent exclusion zone around the site, citing subsurface instability. No explanation followed. When historians attempt to reconstruct the Cold Veil timeline, the fragments form a pattern too deliberate to ignore. An operation launched to recover a Soviet artifact that neither side fully understood, buried for decades under silence, and now beginning to hum again beneath a thinning sheet of Arctic ice. What began as an espionage retrieval in 1957 now stands as a reminder that the Cold War's strangest discoveries were never about weapons alone. They were about power sources that defied their own mortality, left to pulse endlessly in the dark heart of the Polar Sea. Chapter 3: The Phantom Broadcast of Kirovograd. In December 2018, a network of amateur radio operators from Finland to Bulgaria reported the same anomaly. A low-frequency transmission pulsing faintly on 7.238 MHz, a channel long abandoned since the Soviet era. The broadcast repeated a monotone hum interspersed with bursts of static, every 42 seconds precisely. One operator, using a modified SDR receiver, captured fragments of human speech beneath the noise, Russian, male, reciting what sounded like numerical codes. Analysts initially dismissed it as ionospheric interference, but a linguist from Kiev, Anton Moroz, identified an archaic radio protocol embedded within the signal, KGB format 12R, used briefly between 1959 and 1963 for encrypted field communication. Within weeks, a team of Ukrainian telecommunications historians traced the source to an unmarked site 20 kilometers outside Kirovograd, now Kropivnitsky. The coordinates 48.4697 again, 32.2833 pointed to a forgotten Soviet communications hub. An abandoned relay station listed in declassified Ministry of Internal Affairs files as Object 12. By February 2019, Moroz had assembled a small group of researchers and electrical engineers to investigate. The facility was buried under decades of overgrowth, a decaying concrete bunker with collapsed antenna masts and rusted gates welded shut. Officially, it had been decommissioned in 1965. But when they entered, the air was heavy with ozone, and the faint buzz of electrical interference lingered in the hallways. Deep underground, they discovered a sealed chamber with faded stencils reading Resonance, Section 3. Inside, reel-to-reel recorders lined the walls, still wired to dead transformers. Yet one of the oscilloscopes flickered faintly, connected to a power line that, according to blueprints, no longer existed. Against all logic, Object 12 was still receiving energy. The group documented everything. One of Moroz's videos, later leaked anonymously, shows the interior of the chamber, reels spinning without input, meters fluctuating at random intervals, and a faint voice barely audible over static. The voice repeated a sequence, 12, echo, 80, 12. Subsequent digital cleaning revealed fragments of background conversation, voices overlapping, some in Russian, others in what analysts believe to be Korean. The discovery drew immediate attention from the Ukrainian security service SBU, which confiscated the footage and sealed the bunker under the Official Secrets Act. The researchers were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Moroz vanished 2 months later. His last email to a colleague read simply, "They were never ours." What the team had stumbled upon was the remnant of a Cold War psychological operations program known as Project Resonance. Its existence was first hinted at in partially declassified KGB Directorate T documents, retrieved from Moscow's archives in the 1990s. According to these files, between 1959 and 1962, the Soviet Union conducted experiments in low-frequency transmission aimed at neurological disruption of cognitive response in enemy aircrews. The concept was simple but terrifying. Use subliminal radio pulses to induce disorientation or fatigue in pilots, potentially downing aircraft without direct engagement. The program operated out of 3 test sites, Murmansk, Tashkent, and Kirovograd. Only the first 2 were documented as destroyed. The third, Object 12, was supposedly erased in 1963 following catastrophic signal instability. Now, it appeared one fragment of it had survived and was still transmitting. When SBU technicians analyzed the recovered recordings, they found more than voices. Embedded in the audio spectrum were modulated biometric waveforms, patterns corresponding to EEG brainwave data. Someone or something had been transmitting human neurological readings. A cross-check with Soviet prisoner of war databases revealed something horrifying. The subject ID numbers matched American and South Korean servicemen reported missing during the Korean War. If true, it meant that captured POWs had been used as test subjects in neural frequency trials decades earlier. The revelation, however, was too explosive. The files were classified again under SBU Directive 47K/2019. Officially, Project Resonance does not exist. Still, fragments leaked. A whistleblower known only as Sokol released a series of internal memos dated 1962 from the KGB's 9th Directorate. One read, "Transmissions sustained autonomously post-abandonment. Source undetermined. Subject 17 remains active." Another contained a chilling note in the margin. "Signal cannot be neutralized. Behaves as if self-generating." Researchers theorized that the broadcast might be caused by feedback from decaying vacuum tubes interacting with geomagnetic fields. But the intervals were too precise, the patterns too intentional. Even decades after the site's deactivation, the signal maintained coded structure, as if following instructions long after its operators were gone. In 2020, after pressure from local historians, Ukraine's Ministry of Culture briefly permitted an archaeological survey of Object 12. The team recovered fragments of documentation frozen within sealed canisters. One fragment, stamped with the insignia of the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, a body responsible for nuclear weapons development, linked Project Resonance to an earlier classified initiative known as Epsilon Mirror. That project involved neuroelectric field interference in confined test environments. The combination of psychological experimentation and nuclear oversight was unprecedented. It suggested that resonance was not merely about radio disruption, but about understanding, and perhaps manipulating, human cognition through electromagnetic exposure. When the recovered tapes were finally digitized in 2021, analysts noticed something extraordinary. The spectral composition of the broadcast matched no known transmitter from the 1950s. Instead, the pattern aligned with ultra-low frequency oscillations closer to those used in modern submarine communication. Moreover, the timestamps embedded within the recordings included date signatures from 1971, nearly a decade after the facility was abandoned. Either someone had reactivated Object 12 during the 1970s, or the system itself had continued to function autonomously. Both explanations were equally disturbing. In early 2022, fragments of the transmission began interfering with civilian shortwave bands across Eastern Europe again. Amateur radio forums filled with posts about the Kirovograd hum. The pattern was identical to the 2018 recording, but with one addition, a faint overlay of what sounded like breathing. Within days, the interference vanished. Satellite sweeps later revealed military equipment stationed near the original site. No explanation followed, and no official acknowledgement has been made. Historians today describe Project Resonance as the ghost of Soviet science, an intersection of paranoia, experimentation, and human cost. Yet some details remain undeniable. In 2023, a NATO cyber monitoring report documented low bandwidth anomalies emanating from the same coordinates. Though faint, the signal persists, transmitting the same four words: 12, echo, 80, 12. Some believe it's nothing more than static decay, the final breath of obsolete machinery. Others suspect it's something worse, an automatic broadcast, still running its original test protocol, still waiting for instructions from operators who vanished more than half a century ago. Whether mechanical glitch or lingering experiment, the phantom broadcast continues to hum faintly across the shortwave spectrum, untraceable yet persistent, looping endlessly from a buried room in central Ukraine. Its existence is a reminder that even the silence of a defunct war machine can still whisper across time, carrying with it echoes of men whose names were erased, whose voices still pulse from the static, unwilling to fade. Chapter 4. Project Acheron, the Black Sea Experiments. The storm that revealed the wreck began in late November 2020, when divers from Sevastopol's Marine Archaeology Unit were surveying a recently exposed seabed near Cape Fiolant after a landslide. At a depth of 72 meters, sonar imaging showed the unmistakable shape of a steel vessel, 40 meters long, its hull warped by pressure, but intact enough to display a Cyrillic serial, A1213. Within weeks, a dive team recovered sealed canisters from the cargo bay, one of which bore the faded emblem of the Ministry of Medium Machine Building. It was an organization infamous in Cold War archives, the same branch that oversaw nuclear weapons production under the strict secrecy of the Kremlin. The name stenciled on the documents inside was Project Acheron, dated 1948 initial. Analysis at the National Academy of Sciences in Kyiv revealed that the documents referenced bioradiological field assessments conducted aboard modified submarines. The records described human test subjects exposed to controlled radiation fields in deep sea environments to simulate atmospheric compression of atomic detonation effects. The surviving signatures on the logbook were from Navy, Captain Vasily Korotayev and research lead Dr. Pavel Antropov, both missing from public registries after 1952. The recovered reels accompanying the documents, nitrate film stored in airtight cylinders, showed grainy footage of men in naval uniforms overseeing chamber experiments. A voiceover identified the test site as Sevastopol Research Division, Vessel Obelisk. The implications were staggering. Soviet archives held no record of a ship called Obelisk. and neither Western nor Russian historians had encountered the term Project Acheron. When researchers attempted to trace Captain Korotaev's personnel file, they discovered it had been expunged from the Ministry of Defense Index. The absence of official recognition suggested deliberate erasure, not bureaucratic loss. A team of independent analysts, led by historian Natalia Fichenko, pieced together the surviving scraps. A classified 1950 memorandum, discovered in the declassified Pobeda files collection, mentioned loss of experimental personnel during offshore containment breach, classified under naval accident. The date matched the final entry in Acheron's recovered log. In February 2021, Ukrainian divers made a second descent. Beneath layers of silt, they found a reinforced containment capsule bolted to the floor of the central compartment. The capsule bore serial code MB2405 and contained corroded vials labeled Biological Medium 9C. Traces of cesium-137 and cobalt-60 were detected on the exterior, radioisotopes associated with nuclear reactor contamination. Yet the capsule's design was decades ahead of its time, incorporating titanium seals and fiber reinforcement that didn't exist in 1948 manufacturing. Forensic metallurgists concluded that the container had been modified repeatedly, likely through the early 1950s, that suggested Project Acheron had persisted longer than any of its documentation implied. The turning point came with the discovery of audio logs recorded on magnetic wire spools. After painstaking restoration, technicians revealed conversations in Russian between naval officers and scientists discussing biological responses at increasing depth. The voice identified as Dr. Antropov repeatedly warned of cognitive instability in the subjects, describing hallucinatory vocalizations and involuntary muscle responses as pressure and radiation increased. The final entry ended abruptly after a shouted command, then silence, followed by the creak of metal. Minutes later, the tape cut off. That was the same day Obelisk vanished from radar. By April, whispers of the discovery reached Moscow. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement claiming the wreck was civilian research property with no military significance. Yet 2 weeks later, unmarked vessels began operating within the exclusion zone, forcing Ukrainian divers to withdraw. Fichenko, undeterred, smuggled copies of the microfilm reels out of Sevastopol before access was revoked. Their contents were damning. Schematics for an undersea chamber capable of sustaining both radiation and hydrostatic pressure at simulated depths of 10,000 meters. One note in Antropov's handwriting referred to organism adaptation thresholds and subject viability beyond normal parameters. To modern scientists, the implications were unmistakable. Acheron had tested the combined effects of radiation and pressure on living humans. The recovered files also contained a single reference to Phase 3, integration under controlled detonation. Conditions: declassified Soviet atomic. Testing data shows that during 1952, an unregistered underwater explosion occurred off the Crimean coast, coinciding with the final Acheron timestamp. The blast was officially attributed to naval munitions disposal. Radiation levels detected in the area the following month exceeded background readings by 400%. The operation's codename in naval telegrams was Obelisk Night. None of the participants were ever seen again. Modern Russian naval records still refuse to acknowledge Obelisk or Project Acheron. However, a classified CIA report dated 1953, recently unsealed, included a section titled Black Sea Incident. It described intercepted Soviet communications referring to a containment failure involving biological specimens under pressure. The document concluded with the chilling line, "All personnel presumed non-viable." American analysts apparently considered the event a precursor to later Soviet biocontainment strategies, particularly those tested at Stepnogorsk and Sverdlovsk. When marine biologists re-examined the wreck site in 2022, they reported something even more unnerving. Water samples taken from the vessel's perimeter contained trace isotopes and unusual bacterial colonies exhibiting abnormal radiation resistance. One organism was genetically sequenced and found to contain synthetic markers, engineered DNA segments with codon arrangements predating known Soviet genetic engineering capabilities. The findings suggested human intervention decades before such manipulation was technically possible. The results were immediately classified. The mystery deepened when underwater drones mapped internal compartments showing sealed crew quarters that had never been opened. Thermal imaging revealed faint heat signatures inside, impossible after 70 years beneath the sea. Russian authorities quickly declared the site off-limits, citing chemical instability. Satellite imagery later captured the arrival of a deep submergence vessel identified as the Seeliger, a craft typically reserved for nuclear recovery missions. Whatever remained inside Obelisk was quietly removed under cover of darkness. Today, what little remains of Project Acheron survives through fragmented reports and preserved reels scattered in academic archives. The recovered footage, grainy, flickering images of pressure chambers, red indicator lights, and men staring through reinforced glass, serves as the only visual proof that the Soviet Union conducted experiments that fused radiation physics with human endurance research under extreme depths. No official record names the victims, no monument marks their passing. But one final anomaly lingers. A research buoy anchored near the wreck continues to record intermittent acoustic pulses. Short, rhythmic sequences echoing through the water column at 12-minute intervals. Experts describe them as mechanical, like metal under stress. Others hear something closer to breath. The pulses have persisted since the buoy's installation in 2022, unaffected by weather or season. Some scientists believe trapped gases cause the sound, others refuse to speculate. Yet divers who have returned from the site speak of a low vibration that reverberates through their equipment. A continuous hum, as if the machinery within Obelisk still operates. Project Acheron remains one of the most tightly controlled secrets of post-war Soviet history. The name itself, drawn from Greek mythology's River of Woe, feels deliberate, a warning from those who designed it. What began as a scientific study of radiation under pressure evolved into an unspoken crime at sea, buried beneath decades of silt and silence. And somewhere under the Black Sea, sealed behind steel and water, the last experiment of Acheron endures, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Chapter 5. The Vault of Operation Paperclip. When the maintenance crew at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base broke through a welded sub-level door in August 2019, they thought it was an abandoned storage corridor from the 1950s. The air was dry, stale, almost embalmed. At the far end, they found a vault sealed with lead lining and faded warning stencils reading, "Authorized Personnel, 1947. Inside were 200 archival crates stacked neatly, each tagged "Do Not Inventory." Base security halted the discovery within hours, but one technician, before being escorted out, took photographs that later leaked online. The images revealed labels marked with familiar surnames, von Braun, de Boos, Dornberger, names associated with Operation Paperclip, the US program that had relocated German scientists after the war. The leak caught the attention of investigative journalist Claire Morton, who had spent years documenting Cold War research at US installations. When she filed a Freedom of Information request, it was denied under National Security Exception 12B. 2 weeks later, she received an unmarked flash drive containing 312 scanned pages labeled "Restricted, Non-Transferred." The files described early high-altitude physiology research conducted between 1947 and 1952, citing experiments on subject acclimatization under hyperbaric stress. The documents referenced equipment identical to that used in Dachau's aviation trials, long thought destroyed at Nuremberg. Several pages carried handwritten annotations in English and German. Adopted for USAF evaluation, maintain confidentiality. The implication was unavoidable. Some of the same experimental data outlawed. Under war crimes, prosecution had been quietly absorbed into. American Aerospace Medicine Morton began tracing the document codes to the air. Force Medical Research Laboratory's early suborbital studies. Her inquiries uncovered internal memoranda, AFRL 47-22M, discussing legacy data from foreign contributors retained for analysis. The wording was evasive but deliberate. Further digging revealed a procurement log for physiological simulation equipment sourced from an unnamed European contractor in 1948. Photographs in the file showed apparatuses identical to those used for hypoxia testing in German camps. The discovery implied that the United States had not only recruited scientists, but also inherited their unfinished research and, possibly, their test subjects' data. Inside the vault, according to a later internal base inventory, were also reels of microfilm catalogued under Paperclip subsection 7, biomedical advancements. These contained filmed experiments showing human subjects inside decompression chambers, monitored by technicians wearing uniforms without insignia. None of the films bore classification markings, an omission suggesting they were never meant to be filed through official channels. In one reel, time-stamped June 14, 1949, the camera lingers on a subject convulsing as pressure drops. The observer's voice, faint under mechanical hum, says in German, noted cognitive failure at 22,000 meters. When Morton confronted Air Force historians about these materials, she was told the vault's contents were miscategorized acquisitions. But the more she investigated, the clearer it became that the entire sublevel had been purpose-built. Engineering blueprints obtained through retired personnel showed reinforced concrete with radiation shielding and a separate ventilation line that bypassed the rest of the facility. Hallmarks of a containment environment. A marginal note in the blueprint's corner bore the signature WWII 1948. Through 2020, Morton pursued corroboration from former medical officers stationed at Wright-Patterson. One, now in his 90s, recalled a project called Skywell, described as continuation research for high-altitude ejection safety. He admitted that early tests used unverified German datasets and that the results came pre-translated from overseas. When asked whether human trials were repeated on US soil, the veteran hesitated. "Let's just say the data improved," he said quietly. The revelations triggered a classified Department of Defense audit that same year. Although results were never released, leaked correspondence between Air Force archivists referred to potential violation of ethical research lineage under international convention. Internal emails ordered the sealing of all paperclip biomedical files pending evaluation. The vault was reportedly resealed and designated Facility 12D, but digital backups had already circulated among defense historians. By early 2021, Morton's investigation linked the Wright-Patterson files to a series of contracts issued to aerospace companies in the early 1950s. One contract, AFDC 53911, involved extreme environment human factors research. The attached schematics described a pressurization chamber capable of replicating conditions at 120,000 feet, far beyond the altitude reached by aircraft of that era. The test objectives referenced data extrapolated from European high-altitude studies. In a handwritten note, one engineer wrote, "Confirm original source reliability, paperclip physiology set 4. What disturbed Morton most were the medical reports. Decompression trauma records included names of subjects redacted with heavy black bars. But file continuity numbers revealed non-military identifiers, possibly prisoners or asylum patients. Each file contained pulse readings, retinal hemorrhage notations, and oxygen deprivation graphs. The charts were identical to surviving Nazi aviation test data confiscated at the war's end. Despite the horror they represented, those findings became the backbone of early US astronaut survival protocols. In essence, human suffering once condemned as atrocity had been repackaged as scientific progress. Morton's articles, serialized in 2022 under the title The Vault of Paperclip, gained traction but also drew government pushback. Her publisher received cease and desist notices citing potential endangerment of national security agreements. Then, one morning, her website went offline, servers wiped, backups corrupted. She filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, which quietly dismissed it for jurisdictional limitations. Unofficially, sources within the National Archives admitted that the physical files she had referenced no longer existed. "The vault is sealed again," one archivist told her, "and this time, it's not being reopened." Still, fragments survived. A few scanned pages released under a heavily redacted FOIA appeal showed signatures of German scientists employed under US contracts well into 1953, despite official claims that paperclip ended in 1949. One, Dr. Siegfried Ruff, tried but acquitted at Nuremberg, appeared as consultant for aeromedical analysis. Another, Dr. Hubertus Strughold, known as the father of space medicine, was listed on several documents alongside unidentified co-authors, marked only by initials. The lines between captured expertise and complicit knowledge had blurred beyond repair. In 2023, new declassification requests revealed internal Air Force memos recommending ethical re-evaluation of early aeromedical data sets. While phrased cautiously, The documents admitted that certain foundational models derive from non-consensual human experimentation. No names, no accountability, only acknowledgement wrapped in bureaucratic language. The vault's contents remained officially inaccessible, yet rumors persisted that a separate collection, Archive 22R, exists under the Aerospace Medical Research Laboratory in Texas. Its purpose: to digitize historically sensitive material of high technical value. At Wright-Patterson, the corridor leading to the sublevel has since been filled with concrete. Visitors are told it was structurally unsound, but base personnel still report low, rhythmic vibrations emanating from beneath Hangar 18 at night, a coincidence dismissed by engineers as water movement through old pipes. A few technicians, however, claim to have heard something else: the faint whir of film reels turning behind concrete. The Vault of Operation Paperclip stands today as both a myth and a mirror, proof that the pursuit of supremacy blurred every moral line after the war. Beneath the patriotic veneer of scientific advancement, the ghosts of forbidden experiments remain entombed, their data integrated into the very systems that carried humankind into the stratosphere. In the silence of the sealed sublevel, one can still imagine the hum of old machinery, the hiss of decompression valves, and the unending whisper of history repeating itself behind steel that was never meant to be opened again.